Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10, and starting from now you also get entered into the Guilds of Ravnica booster box giveaway, which runs until October 5th. Hello and welcome to another episode of Spike Sunday, a weekly series where we take a look at established standard or modern decks, and this week we're taking a look at blue-green Infect in modern, a deck that's trying to combo kill the opponent by enhancing Infect creatures with pump spells. So first off, let's take a look at all the Infect creatures in our deck. Of course, the Infect mechanic, meaning that if a creature with Infect deals damage to a creature, it deals damage to that creature in the form of -1/-1 counters, and it deals damage to players in the form of poison counters, and if an opponent has 10 poison counters, you win the game. So you only need to deal 10 damage instead of the regular 20. So taking a look at our Infect creatures, we've got 4 copies of Glistener Elf, 1 mana for a 1/1 creature with Infect. We've got 4 copies of Blighted Agent, which is 2 mana for a 1/1 creature with Infect that can be blocked, and 4 copies of Inkmoth Nexus, which is a land that turns into a 1/1 creature with Flying and Infect. So those are the 12 win conditions in the deck, and then most of the rest of the deck is just pump spells to get our creatures through for as much damage as possible, as quickly as possible. So let's take a look at all these pump spells, where we have 4 copies of Mutagenic Growth, which we can cast by just paying 2 life instead of the normal mana cost. Otherwise we can also play it by paying a single green to give target creature +2/+2 until end of turn. We also have 4 copies of Might of Old Krosa, which can give a creature +4/+4 until end of turn if we cast it during our main phase. And 3 copies of Groundswell, which also gives +4/+4 if landfall was triggered, otherwise it's just +2/+2. Then 3 copies of Become Immense, which has Delve, so we can exile a number of cards from our graveyard to help us pay for the generic mana cost. So we can potentially play it for just a single green mana to give target creature +6/+6 until end of turn. Then we've got some protection spells as well. We've got 4 copies of Blossoming Defense, which gives +2/+2 and hexproof until end of turn, so helps us protect our creatures from removal spells. And we also have 4 copies of Vines of Vastwood, which for a single green mana says target creature can be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control this turn, and if we also pay the kicker cost of an additional green mana, that creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn as well. And then we have 2 copies of Rancor, which is an aura that gives enchanted creature +2/+0 and trample, and if Rancor goes into our graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return it to our hand. Then we also have some utility spells. We've got 1 copy of Dismember with an additional copy in the sideboard to deal with opposing creatures, Spell Pierce to counter non-creature spells, additional copy in the sideboard, and a Spellskite, which can protect our creatures from spot removal spells from the opponent, and have an additional copy in the sideboard as well. Then we also have a single copy of Distortion Strike, which gives target creature +1/+0 and unblockable until end of turn, and it also has rebound, so on the following turn we get to recast it. And then we also have 4 copies of Noble Hierarch, which serves an important role since the Exalted is very powerful in this deck. If we only attack with 1 creature, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each instance of Exalted. And of course the Noble Hierarch also helps us ramp out our spells, so we can more easily cast multiple pump spells in the same turn and keep up protection spells. And then we have a pretty straightforward mana base. We've got a total of 9 fetch lands, for Windswept Heath, for Wooded Foothills, 1 Misty Rainforest. Doesn't really matter which ones you get as long as they can fetch a green source, since we're not playing a basic island in this deck. We've got 2 basic forests we can fetch up with those fetch lands, and 2 breeding pools. And we also have a copy of Dryad Arbor, which we can fetch up with our green fetch lands, can help us protect against edict effects like Liliana of the Veil, but sometimes if we're out of Infect creatures, we can also just go on the beatdown plan with normal damage and pump up our Dryad Arbor. And we also have 2 copies of Pendelhaven, which is also great in our deck, which is a green producing land that gives a 1/1 creature +1/+2 until end of turn, so works with all our Infect creatures. So that's the main deck. Taking a quick look at our sideboard, we've already mentioned a few of our sideboard cards. We've got a Dispel to counter instants, additional copy of Spell Pierce against non-creature spells, 3 Nature's Claims to deal with artifacts and enchantments, and of course we don't care about the opponent gaining 4 life since we're winning with Infect damage anyway. We've got 2 Grafdigger's Cage against graveyard decks, additional Dismember as removal, then 4 copies of Invisible Stalker, which can come in against decks with a ton of spot removal, since Invisible Stalker is a creature with hexproof that can be blocked, so we can kind of go on the normal damage plan instead, and have a more reliable threat that can stay in play for a while, and then just win with normal pump spells. And then we have an additional copy of Spellskite, as we mentioned. We also have a copy of Wild Defiance, which shines against damage-based removal spells from the opponent, since our creature will get bigger before it takes the damage from the burn spell. And of course it also combines nicely with all our pump spells, since our creature will get bigger whenever it gets targeted. And we also have a Viridian Corrupter, which is an additional Infect threat that shines against artifact-based decks, as it can destroy one when it enters the battlefield. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw. This hand seems fine. 2 Infect creatures and some pump spells, pretty much what we want. Turn 1 Spire of Industry. So some artifact-based deck, don't exactly know which one. And what land do we lead with? I guess we can go tap Breeding Pool and then next turn go Inkmoth Nexus into Blighted Agent. Seems fine. Could run out to Wooded Foothills and kind of hide which deck we are potentially. But the Wooded Foothills could be useful in combination with the landfall trigger. And turn to Everflowing Chalice, so could be the Dice Factory deck. We're just gonna run out a Blighted Agent. And with double Mutagenic Growth, we can definitely do some damage here. And there's the Astral Cornucopia. And a Core Tapper. Alright, so our opponents got everything they want in early game here. Ancient Stirrings as well. What we don't want to see is a Chalice of the Void on 1, since that can shut down most of our deck. And our opponent finds a Glimmer Void instead. That's okay. So next turn we have lethal in multiple ways. We could go Pendelhaven and then double Mutagenic Growth Groundswell. We could go double Mutagenic Growth fetch Become Immense. And there's an Ensnaring Bridge, which we don't care about since our opponent still has 2 cards in hand. But if they can empty their hand, then we're in trouble. Instead, still 2 cards in hand, so now we've got to win. Just need to make sure to attack as a 1-1 or a 2-2, and then use our pump spells after attacking, but that's not an issue. So we'll move to combat, attack. So I guess the Might of Old Krosa would be a little bit awkward here. So now we can fetch, get a forest, Mutagenic Growth paying 2 life, Mutagenic Growth paying 2 life, and now we have enough for Become Immense. Could have also cast Groundswell first, I guess, but no need to overkill. Alright, so that's a pretty quick turn 3 win here against the Dice Factory deck. Got just underneath the Ensnaring Bridge here. So probably want our Viridian Corrupter and our 3 copies of Nature's Claim. Nature's Claim a little bit awkward against Chalice of the Void on 1, since of course it doesn't deal with it. Then Spell Pierce is going to be decent, whereas Dispel is not going to be amazing. Then I don't think we need Dismembers or Spellskites. Opponent's going to be pretty low on spot removal. And Distortion Strike can probably go as well. Just want to be lean and mean. And our interaction is going to be Spell Pierce and Nature's Claim and Corrupter. And what do we cut? I guess we can probably cut 2 copies of Vines, since as a pump spell it's not the most efficient one. And we don't expect to need the protection as much. So I guess it makes sense to cut it. Could also cut maybe something like a Rancor, since it's awkward in the face of Ensnaring Bridge. But we still have Noble Hierarch that can attack past Ensnaring Bridge, which is pretty useful. So I think the setup is probably fine, and we might readjust after the second game. So we're on the draw, don't think we can keep a no-lander sadly. But this one seems fine. And bottom the Wooded Foothills, looking for more pump spells I think. So there's Astral Cornucopia, which now enables Spire of Industry. Ancient Stirrings finds Ether Hub. That's fine. I guess now with Become Immense there's a reason to potentially just want to fetch as much as possible in case we find more fetch lands. We know there's a fetch land on the bottom of our deck, which wouldn't be the worst draw in the world, so shuffling that back into our deck is not a big deal. And let's get this Glistener Elf down. Alright, so want to dodge Chalice of the Void here at all costs. Although we do have Pendelhaven and Become Immense, which do give us a little bit of game against Chalice now that we already have Glistener Elf in play, but would still rather avoid it. Alright, it's going to be an Aethersworn Canonist instead, that's okay. Dies to Nature's Claim as well. So I think we're fine just casting the Nature's Claim here, and then playing a Rancor. Although by playing Rancor, of course, we shut down Pendelhaven activations, But if we can get in a hidden for 3 and then next turn potentially become immense, we have lethal. So that seems worth it. And getting rid of the blocker and the Canonist effect seems useful. So let's kill that. Fetch up basic forest seems fine here, don't think we need to get a second breeding pool. And then Rancor. There's also an argument for playing the elf here, but if we can present lethal next turn, probably want to go for it. This play might be worse in the face of Ensnaring Bridge next turn, but our opponent would need to empty most of their hand. So they would need a 0 mana play alongside the Ensnaring Bridge. And there's a bridge, still 3 cards in hand. And our opponent's gonna pass a turn, so we should have it here. Just attack with a 3-power Glistener Elf and then become immense for the win. So that was a pretty fast game, but that's usually how it goes against uninteractive decks. Just try to be as fast as possible, and Infect is one of the fastest decks around. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand seems okay, except for the fact that it doesn't have green mana. So if we can draw a fetch land, this hand's great. If we don't, then this hand doesn't really do much. So we've got 9 fetch lands, 2 breeding pools, 2 Pendelhavens, 2 forests. So we've got a decent amount of green sources, but we're definitely not favorites to draw one next turn exactly. And if we miss for one turn, then things get really bad. So we probably have to go to 6. On the draw we might keep that hand, but on the play it's kind of sketchy. This one doesn't have any infect creatures, so I'm okay going to 5 here. Alright, we'll keep this. And do we want a forest? We kind of do, since that lets us activate Inkmoth and then still cast a pump spell. Alright, and we'll lead with Inkmoth, since we're probably attacking for 1 poison next turn. And the Infect deck doesn't need a ton of cards to win the game, just an Infect creature with some pump spells will do it. Rancor's a little bit awkward with Inkmoth, since of course it doesn't stay on our creature land. So we'll attack for 1. And a turn 1 Birds of Paradise from the opponent. Birds can at some point block the Inkmoth Nexus as well, so that's relevant. But if we have enough mana, we can use Rancor to trample to minimize the effect of the bird. So let's see what they're up to. Tectonic Edge, alright, so we do want to be careful not to play out too many lands. And a Courser of Krufix, revealing Lotus Cobra, so it's some sort of creature-based ramp deck. Spellskite is interesting, our opponent could easily have Path to Exile, but since we have Inkmoth as our threat, we can play around Path pretty easily and eventually play the Spellskite. So for now I think we're fine dealing some damage. So we'll go with the Might of Old Krosa, get in for 5. Put the opponent to 6 poison, which is pretty close to dead here. So that might put them in an awkward spot where they won't be able to use the Birds of Paradise, since they need it as a blocker. Opponent draws Lotus Cobra and there's another one on top. Courser gets in for 2, down to 15. And our opponent with a Windswept Heath, but they decided not to run out Lotus Cobra beforehand. So if they may be planning to play something expensive, or they want to keep up Tectonic Edge. Now there's a Tireless Tracker on top. And a Knight of the Reliquary. Alright, so Knight can fetch up Ghost Quarters, which can deal with our Inkmoth. So if we can draw a land here, and if our opponent doesn't have Path, we could deal a lot of damage, and Mutagenic Growth might do it as well. So we can activate Inkmoth, put a Rancor on it, so we'll have 3 power of Trample, and then Mutagenic makes it 5. So that's enough for the kill, and I think we have to go for it, since if they get to untap with Knight of the Reliquary, then the Inkmoth is pretty much a goner. If they have Path, that would be too bad. But I don't think we can play around it really. So let's attack. Opponent's not gonna block. And we're gonna go for it. And if this doesn't work, we're probably dead. And our opponent doesn't have the Path, and we get there. Awesome, so on a multi-5, got there anyways. So against a green-white kind of creature value town deck, probably want our Dismembers. I'm unsure how much we value Invisible Stalker. It seems pretty bad, since our opponent has a lot of life gain built in. So I don't think we'll want that. Wild Defiance doesn't seem necessary. Spellskite could be okay, but our opponent doesn't have a ton of removal. It's mainly Path to Exile. So Spell Pierce can probably go. Distortion Strike seems good in combination with Glistener Elf. I like the protection spells. Rancor's okay. So I think I like this setup. Could bring in the second Spellskite, but I think one's probably enough. And I don't love the Spell Pierces in this matchup. Ghost Corridors and Tectonic Edges on Inkmoth are going to be painful, so our best win condition is probably just our Blighted Agent backed up with protection spells. Alright, we've got our Blighted Agent, no protection spell sadly, but I think we'll have to keep. We've got a Dismember for a potential turn 1 mana creature, but doesn't look like we're gonna need it. And Vines of Vastwood was a good pickup. So let's play Wooded Foothills, say go, fetch a Breeding Pool end of turn. And Devoted Druid. Could be scary, so our opponent's playing the combo Devoted Druid plus Vizier. So we could definitely Dismember here. Could also wait until turn 3 to play the Blighted Agent so we can protect it with Vines. In which case we might as well just fetch end of turn, get a tapped Breeding Pool and then untap and then Dismember. I think we're fine dismembering the Devoted Druid here. Reason to dismember right now is if we let them untap, they could generate 2 mana with it and potentially cast Collected Company or Court of Calling for 3. While if we dismember right now, we don't give them that option. So we'll pay 4 life, play Dismember, run out Windswept Heath, which can grab another Breeding Pool end of turn, and then next turn we can play Blighted Agent with Vines up. The more aggressive play here would just be playing Blighted Agent on 2 after maybe using Dismember on the opponents. End of turn they've got a second Devoted Druid, alright. It's gonna make things tricky if they have the Vizier to go with it, but no third land from the opponent. So let's get another Breeding Pool here, I think, over anything else. And run out Blighted Agent with Vines up. And picked up a second copy as well, so opponent could kill us here if they've got infinite combo. But our opponent seemed to be more like a value town deck, so I don't know how deep their combo goes. Looks like they're just making a bit of mana with Devoted Druid for now, and a Collected Company, that's fine. Finds Knight of the Reliquary, Birds of Paradise. Alright, so we don't exactly know the implications of Knight since we don't know all the lands they have in their deck, but presumably Vines will be good enough to protect the Blighted Agent here. Pendelhaven, not a bad pickup. Alright, so we should actually have lethal here. We can play Groundswell, that's +4. Kicked Vines is +4 as well, and then Rancor is another 2. And our opponent stepped out, so barring a Slaughter Pact, this should be game. So because we didn't need to keep up Vines of Vastwood as protection, we could go for it here. If our opponent had kept up mana, then we probably would have done it over the course of 2 turns. But yeah, Infect can be pretty brutal, and we're seeing it in action here. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play. And the sand seems fine. Double Infect threats on pump spells. Ideal hand. And which land to lead with? My guess is probably the Wooded Foothills. Just get a tapped Breeding Pool end of turn, so we don't have to take too much damage. And then next turn we'll go Inkmoth plus Blighted Agent. There's a chance against a turn 1 discard spell, like they just did, that playing the turn 1 Inkmoth is better, since then on turn 2 we can at least attack for 1 poison, but against an unknown opponent, preserving your life total can also be irrelevant. So this Inquisition is probably going to go after the Blighted Agent, leaving us with a single Inkmoth Nexus as our win condition. Still going to get the breeding pool here. Want to thin out the deck a little bit. So wouldn't be able to attack for 1 here. And Blackleaf Cliffs could mean Mardu Pyromancer, could mean Jund. Dark Confidant indicates Jund, which is not going to be a good matchup for us. Removal with discard spells backed up by some pressure like Tarmogoyf can get out of hand. Alright, Pendelhaven's not a bad draw here, so we can activate Inkmoth Nexus and get in for 7 poison. That seems worth it here. Just try and push damage while the opponent's tapped out. And I guess we don't need to show them the Pendelhaven yet. They know about the forest. So we'll show them the forest. There's also argument for fetching in case of Become Moments, but we'll have plenty of stuff in the graveyard. So denying the info might be more useful. So animate Inkmoth, Mutagenic Growth, and then we'll Groundswell. And then our opponent can no longer tap out, otherwise they risk taking lethal on the way back. So that 1 point we potentially missed with the Inkmoth by not playing it on turn 1 could come back to bite us here, since let's say they discard Groundswell, Pendelhaven plus Inkmoth would be lethal, whereas now it wouldn't be. So our opponent's at 7 poison. Of course we can't take advantage of the damage that the opponent takes from Dark Confidant. They reveal Fatal Push, which is the worst case scenario here. So now we need a protection spell and our opponent just needs to keep up 1 mana. And Fatal Push is 10 times better than Lightning Bolt against Infect, since it doesn't care about toughness. It's going to be Inquisition taking Groundswell, and our opponent's going to be keeping up with that Fatal Push for the rest of the game. And we can't really attack with our Inkmoth unless we find a protection spell here. But if we do, then it could be game over. So definitely not an easy spot for the opponent. Pick up a Noble Hierarch, which we'll play, and might as well run out Pendelhaven. And let's see if the opponent wants to use removal end of turn. If they have multiple removal spells in hand, that would make sense. Fatal Push kills Noble. So now we technically don't know any of the opponent's cards, as they reveal Bloodstained Mire. Alright, so just hoping the opponent taps out and we top deck a protection spell. It's gonna be Liliana of the Veil, but now it's just gonna plus and make us discard a Misty. But Dark Confidant plus Liliana is an annoying combo, so they could have Lightning Bolts or Fatal Pushes still. Alright, instead just another Inkmoth, so definitely fine to attack our opponent here. And our opponent might even take it, since they're afraid of a potential Blossoming Defense. And that would play to our advantage. And our opponent is definitely thinking about it, since, yep, they're gonna take it. So probably indicates that they do have removal they want to use end of turn here, but the fact is we have a second Inkmoth. So removal end of turn on the Inkmoth is not the end of the world. So drawing the Inkmoth there, with the fact that our opponent did have the removal spell in hand, actually play to our advantage. So our opponent's gonna shock and cast a bolt on the Inkmoth. So if they're out of removal now, we could attack for lethal next turn. Reveal Scavenging Ooze. Don't really care about that too much, although it is a way for the opponent to pressure us a little bit faster. So yeah, it pretty much boils down to whether the opponent has instant speed removal in hand or not. And Huntmaster of the Fells is definitely not instant speed removal, so yeah, opponent might be dead here. They do have a Verdant, they're gonna plus. Discard Overgrown Tomb, we know the last card in hand is Scavenging Ooze. They're confident, gets in for 2. And we just have to untap, activate Inkmoth, and attack for the win. Alright, so we got game 1 against Jund, and it looked pretty bad there for a second. So how do we want to sideboard? Opponent does pack quite a few copies of Liliana of the Veil. So Invisible Stalker is actually not as safe as we would think, but is probably still worth bringing in. Then don't mind Dismember to answer cards like Dark Confidant. Dispel and Spellskite also could be worth it, although Spellskite's kind of bad against Kolaghan's Command. So maybe we don't want it after all. And so if we're bringing in 4 copies of Invisible Stalker, what do we cut? Spell Pierce can be okay, can be kind of bad. Distortion Strike can be fine in combination with Glistener Elf. But against a removal heavy deck, I think we can do without. And then maybe just cut 2 copies of Glistener Elf, since it's not the most reliable win condition. And what else do we cut? Could see cutting a Rancor. And then keep all the instant speed pump spells, the protection spells. 1 Spell Pierce seems fine, maybe even want a second one. Can counter removal spells, Liliana's, especially for on the Invisible Stalker plan instead. Yeah, I think I like the setup. Again, Spellskite could be worth it, it's pretty good against Lightning Bolt. I guess we want a Wild Defiance instead. Maybe instead of the Spell Pierce, since that's very good against Lightning Bolt and Kolaghan's Command. And also makes it so for in top deck mode, top decking a pump spell becomes a lot better. And also goes well with the Invisible Stalker plan. So I think I like this setup. Cutting 2 elves to make room for Invisible Stalkers. Cutting the somewhat conditional pump spells. And bringing in an extra removal spell. Well, we drew our sideboard cards, but 5 lands seems like a bit much, even with Dryad Arbor in our deck. Alright, this is a better mix of lands and spells. And do we want a Might of Old Krosa? I don't think so, since a discard spell taking away Invisible Stalker would mean we need to top deck one. So we want to maximize our chances of finding another creature here. Alright, second Invisible Stalker is great. So we get to Windswept Heath, say go. Opponent leading with Raging Ravine makes it less likely they'll have a turn 3 Liliana. It's gonna be a Dark Confidant on turn 2. Don't really mind seeing that, given our Invisible Stalker plan, since now the damage does matter. But of course we're hoping to dodge a Liliana of the Veil here. Opponent reveals another Dark Confidant. That's what we do want to see. Turn Dark Confidant into a liability, and just a treetop village to play. Opponent gets in for 2. And do they play out another Dark Confidant here? They're not going to. Alright, so now what? Don't have the land for Groundswell. Could Vines just for the +4 effect. Opponent doesn't have double black yet, so don't know if we need to run out the Invisible Stalker here, or if we can wait. So my guess is we can just attack for 1, play another Invisible Stalker, could get punished by Engineered Explosives on 2, but it's not super likely that we'll be facing it. And I guess we might as well get in our Mutagenic Growth while we can, since it looks like we're on a damage plan this game, very unlikely that we're still gonna switch to the Infect plan. So we'll attack for 1, use Mutagenic Growth, trade 2 damage for 2 damage, play another Invisible Stalker. And then we have a bit of insurance against Liliana. And we're also just adding another threat to the board. And then we're hoping to top deck a land so that the Groundswell becomes live. And we're pretty close to casting Become Immense as well. So don't hit our spot here. Let's see if we can kind of sidestep the opponent's interaction. Opponent reveals Bloodstained Mire, so they could potentially have double black for Liliana now. But it's not even clear that the opponent would keep in all 4 copies of Liliana of the Veil, since they can be somewhat clunky against Infect, can't really tap out on turn 3 all the time. Alright, opponent's gonna go on the beatdown plan, so it's just a race. And I do like our chances in a race here with all the pump spells we have in hand. And of course the Dark Confidant triggers could also work to our advantage. If our opponent has a bunch of Lightning Bolts in hand, then things could get rough. Alright, Inkmoth Nexus was a good draw since that enables Groundswell, so play Inkmoth, Groundswell's +4, so we've got 6. And then let's see, we'll have 4 cards in graveyard, so we can cast Become Immense. Don't have triple green, so can't cast Blossoming Defense and Become Immense. But let's see, this is 6, 10, 12, so opponent can't crack the fetch, and if they take damage from Dark Confidant, they're dead. So that seems pretty great. So let's Groundswell. And we might as well Become Immense the other Invisible Stalker, no real reason here. So we're attacking for 12. And now we just have to win the Dark Confidant lottery to ensure victory. But the fact our opponent can't fetch here also makes a big difference, since they can't even kill their own Dark Confidant here. And our opponent reveals Ancient Grudge, which is gonna deal 2 to them and win us a game. Awesome, so managed to win a cool sideboarded game here with our Invisible Stalkers versus Jund. That's gonna wrap things up for today. I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.